We are joined today by Jeff Harms, our education manager, who's sharing a behind the scenes look and behind the scenes experience with one of our ambassador animals.
Hello everyone, my name is Jeff. I'm the education manager here at the Oregon Coast Aquarium. I also get to take care of our ambassador animal opossum named Pete. So today we're going to go behind the scenes to meet Pete. And it's an opportunity to show you a glimpse of some of the behind the scenes care that guests don't get to see on a regular visit. So I used the term animal ambassador when I talked about Pete. Basically, ambassador animals are representatives of their species in human care. And what basically our goal is to help guests feel a connection to an individual animal like Pete here. And hopefully you'll feel more empathy then for their wild counterparts. So we're going to prep his food. He usually gets about 70 grams of fruits and veggies. But we'll actually alter his diet depending on his motivation and his weight. So I get a weight on him every week, and then if his weight's up or down, I might vary his food or his diet a little bit. In the wild, opossums are generalists and they're omnivores, so they're pretty opportunistic. They'll kind of eat whatever they can find. They eat fruits and veggies. Sometimes people find them in the garden eating their vegetables. They'll eat cat food, so a lot of times they come up on people's porches to eat cat or dog food if they have it laid out. They have a really, really good sense of smell, and they spend lots of time, usually at night, foraging for food, and usually just using their nose mainly to find it. They are scavengers, so they're part of nature's cleanup crew. They help clean up the environment for us, so they're often found on roads, eating roadkill animals. Sometimes they actually get hit by cars that way because they're kind of, just kind of out in the street. So it's always good to be careful when you're driving at night. They'll eat things like ticks. They've been known to eat thousands of ticks in a year. Here, we don't feed Pete ticks or slugs or anything like that. We give him a pretty balanced diet of fruits and veggies. And he also eats some kind of protein, like a hard-boiled egg or a fish every day. And then the base of his diet is an omnivore pellet, kind of like a dog chow. That's a kind of a healthy pellet for him to get all of his nutrients from. So training is really important for all of our animals too here at the aquarium. So you'll notice I use a target stick. This is a way for me to just kind of ask Pete to kind of move him around in a way that we kind of communicate with each other and he can understand. So he knows if he goes and puts his nose and follows this little stick, it leads to good things. So for Pete, a good thing is a little treat, piece of food. So he'll follow this target stick, and when he does the correct behavior or whatever we asked for, I'll click it. And that's a bridge to let him know he did the right thing. So you'll see if you watch our mammal team, do a training session, they often just say the word good. It kind of works as a bridge. And every animal we do a little bit different training with. So for Pete, I do a lot of targeting. He doesn't see really well. Opossums don't have great eyesight, but he has really good sense of smell. But he does see well enough to follow this target around. He's actually trained to go into a crate on his own. So a crate is nice if we need to take him somewhere. Usually he's just going somewhere else for a training session or coming out to see guests in the public. But if we need to bring him to a vet or take him to a vet, it's nice to have them just choose to go into the crate on their own and be comfortable in there. You'll see when I pull him around on a cart, he often likes to hide underneath his bedding. It's kind of a cute thing that he does. Possums are really good climbers, so I can actually target him up ramps and up on perches and things like that. He has really good balance as well. And their tail is really interesting. They actually have a prehensile tail, which means they can move it kind of like an arm. And mainly what they use it for is for balance. So if he's on a stump or walking on a fence, anything like that, or they can actually use it to kind of hold on, balance themselves a little bit. Another thing that they use it for, which is pretty cool, is they can actually use it to move bedding around, like den materials. So a female, if she had babies, would use her tail to grab a bunch of nesting material, like sticks and things like that, and she would take it into a den. Pete has several dens that he can sleep in, little beds. He has a pink shark he sleeps in, which is kind of like his summer home. It's a little bit cooler. And he also has a heated box with a lot of bedding in it with a heating pad on the bottom. And I noticed that he moves his bedding around quite a bit. And I knew that they moved things with their tails, but I'd never actually seen it. So what we did is we put a night vision camera up, trail cam, so we could see what he was doing at night. And he does actually wrap towels and blankets and things with his tail, and he'll drag it around and make a little nest for himself in different dens. So sometimes it comes in, it looks like he has a party because there's blankets everywhere. So I mentioned that opossums are foragers, so they're mainly foraging. So Enrichment is really important. It's something we do with all of our animals here at the aquarium, and it basically simulates a natural behavior. So for opossums, their main behavior in the wild is foraging. So I have several different things that I can offer Pete to allow him to forage and kind of simulate the behavior. So you'll see I have what I call a snuffle mat or a foraging mat. What I do is I hide food inside of basically like this little carpet, and when Pete comes out, he has to use his nose to locate it. He really likes it. It's one of the first things I bring out to different areas when I'm training him because he's comfortable with that. But he likes to come out and forage and kind of simulate that behavior. Opossums are kind of interesting because they have a small brain per body size, but they have been found to be really good at locating food and remembering where food can be found. So for example, in the wild, if there's a bird feeder, they'll often come back to that feeder, on a regular basis to check for food on the ground. Opossums have actually been found to be really good at puzzles and problem solving as well, and mazes. So I like to give Pete a puzzle here, and he's pretty good at picking up on opening how to open it up and how to complete it to find his food. So it's kind of fun to be able to watch him do this. So some of the other behaviors that we like to train are what we call husbandry behaviors. Basically, we want our animals to be prepared for a vet visit. So I'll do things like clip his nails. We do that on a regular basis. We weigh them on a scale. And then also I'll kind of demonstrate how I wrap him in a towel. So if a vet needs to come and check him out, it's a lot easier sometimes to kind of have him burritoed in a towel. So that's something I like to do on a regular basis, so it's not a stressful occurrence for him. And most of the time, 99% of the time, I wrap him up. He just gets food, so he doesn't mind it at all. So basically, I'll let him kind of eat, kind of wrap him up in a towel and press on him. So if the vets come and I need to wrap him up and kind of pick him up, then it's a lot less stressful experience for him. We do that with all of our animals. We do as much of this pre-training as possible. Usually the animals develop a good trust with their trainers or their primary keepers, and less so, with people they don't see as often like a vet. So we like to do as much as we can with the person that they trust. So when the vets come, it's an easy experience for them, a lot easier. So Pete was actually acquired from a different zoo in California. They found the mother on site and found that she had 9 babies. So the zoo staff actually raised the 9 babies, and then they found homes for them at different zoos and aquariums all across the country. So Pete was from that litter. We got him in June, and he's about 2.5 years old. So opossums are pretty short-lived. Usually they only live a year or 2 out in the wild, but usually under human care, they can live to be 4 years on average. So he has a pretty cushy life here, and he'll probably live quite a bit longer than he would. They're really interesting animals. They're actually the only native marsupial in North America. So a lot of times people think they're rodents because they have kind of a tail that kind of looks like a rat. They kind of look like a big mouse, but they're marsupials. They're actually not related to rodents at all. And they have some really cool characteristics and behaviors that they do. You might notice he has a bare tail, and I mentioned before that it's prehensile, which means that he can use it to grip things or kind of wrap around and use it for balance. So their tail is very interesting. They have opposable thumbs on their back feet that they can use to grip branches when they're climbing, so they're actually really excellent climbers. Generally, though, when they're denning, they den on the ground. They don't usually den up in the trees. They have some kind of misconceptions, too. They're kind of a misunderstood animal. A lot of times people think opossums are aggressive because they'll hiss at them. So most of the time, if you come up across one and you startle it, that's what you see is a big mouthful of teeth and a hissing animal that looks kind of angry. But they're scared and just trying to scare you away. So their first reaction is to try to run away from a threat if they can, but they're not very fast. So then they'll turn around and they'll hiss. And if they get really, really scared, they actually, quote, play opossum. It's basically an involuntary behavior where the animal will pass out. They'll actually put on a really convincing show. They'll emit a smelly odor, stick out their tongue, hold their hands together really tight, kind of roll their eyes back just to pretend that they're dead. Usually a predator, they often don't want to eat a dead animal, especially if it smells like it's sick or has a disease. So they put on this big show. It's really a cool kind of a last-ditch effort for them. So when they play possum, it's not like they're laying there, and they can open up their eye whenever. They have to kind of lay there until the threat is gone. Opossums are pretty commonly seen in the wild. A lot of times when people see Pete and see that he's pretty docile and trainable, they think about, he'd be a great pet. They are actually illegal to possess in Oregon without a permit. So I always encourage people to, when you see an animal like Pete or an opossum out in the wild, to respect them, keep your distance, you don't want to get too close, and to keep yourself safe as well. We hope that you enjoyed getting to meet Pete and seeing a little bit of behind the scenes care for him. Hopefully we'll have you back here before too long. You can see him out in a public space. So that was a little bit about Pete. He actually lives behind the scenes. So if you saw that sign where it said Opossum Manor, that's where he lives. And it's not a place you could walk by it on a behind the scenes tour, but it's not a place that people get to go out and see. So we just wanted to make sure you could see kind of how he gets cared for. He's also an animal that people don't always see when you come to the aquarium. He's not on a public side, so you only kind of a lucky thing if you get to see him. Usually we'll bring him out in ugly months, like when it's raining, out into the lobby. So you might be able to walk in and see him in the lobby. Or in the summer when it's nicer, on a sunny day, we'll bring him out onto a stage outside, so guests can kind of walk by and see him. And he's usually out for like 20 or 30 minutes. We kind of let him forage and do a little training session, just so guests can get a little bit closer look at an opossum. A lot of people don't care for them too much. They think they're gross. One misconception that I didn't mention was that people often think that they carry rabies. That's really, really unlikely. Their body temperature is a little bit too low, that they're not really a carrier. It's possible, but really unlikely that they would ever have rabies. But when they put on their whole threat display and they hiss and they stick their tongue out, it might look like there's something wrong with them. So I can see how that could be a thing. But they were just real docile animals that don't really want to be around people or animals. They don't attack animals very often. So if a pet comes across them, they're more likely to play dead than to try to bite them or anything like that. So I just like to, that's one question we often get is, why do we have an opossum here at the aquarium? We have vultures and other animals too that aren't aquatic, but they're native, they live in the Oregon coast, and we love to talk about some of those animals that are misunderstood. They're actually from the southeast, so they're called Virginia opossums. So they're native to the southeast, but they were brought pretty much all the way across the country. We think probably out here as a food source, and they've been out here since the early 1900s. So they've been around for quite a while. That's a great question. They groom about as much as a cat. And if you saw, I might have seen in the video where he's cleaning his paws. Every time he eats, he cleans his paws, but they're really, really clean. The other misconception is that they're dirty, some trash can or some other space to get food. But they're actually really clean, and they groom about as much as a cat does. So that's a great question. I did. I like alliterative things, so I thought Pete the opossum sounded fun. They do eat a lot of ticks, so that's one thing. We try to talk about their benefits. They eat a lot of ticks, so they're known to eat, like, they can eat 5,000 ticks in a season, they say. So they eat a lot of ticks that they find on themselves. So areas where there's lots of ticks that can cause Lyme disease, they're really good to have around for that. And in Oregon, they're considered invasive. That's why you can't have one. And rehabbers, I don't think can even rehab them. So yeah, they're considered invasive even though they've been here for 100 years. Yeah, they have a really interesting life cycle. So they're really short-lived. They only live about 1 or 2 years out in the wild. And they're marsupials, so they have a pouch. And the gestation period for the babies is about 12 days. And after 12 days, the baby will crawl out into the pouch. And then she can raise 13 babies at a time. That's as many nipples she has for feeding them milk. So she could raise 13 babies. And generally, they stay in the pouch for a couple months. And then when they get big enough, they'll actually crawl out and ride around on the mama's back. So you might see there's pictures of, like 13 babies that are getting carried around by the poor mother. I always think they should call it opossum back rides instead of piggyback rides, because they're really good at carrying them around. And usually after about 3 or 4 months, then the babies will branch off and be off on their own. So again, they only live about 2 years, but a female could have 3 litters in a year. So in that short amount of time, she could have a lot of babies. Yeah, probably the main predators around here would be like coyotes, like land mammals like that. Or at night, since they're nocturnal, great horned owls would be likely to get them, and a big owl like that. So those would be the most common predators out here. Maybe a cougar, you know, anything like that. Their display works pretty well to playing a possum because a lot of animals, like a mountain lion, probably wouldn't want to eat a dead, diseased animal. So that display works pretty well usually for them. Yeah, opossums have well, the ones we've had, the previous one we had, his name was Flower, and then we have Pete now. And both of them, they get fed a similar diet, but their favorite food are sweet things. So they love, I give them like a peanut butter paste, kind of just basically peanut butter I put on top sometimes as a treat. But they have a sweet tooth. So usually if it's his normal diet, he'll eat his fruit first. He really likes pineapple, banana, apples, mangoes. He likes tropical fruit, even though he's from a temperate area, ironically. And then he'll usually eat his veggies second. And then he likes his protein too. So fish and whatever I give him, fish or hard-boiled eggs, a popular item. But then usually the healthy part, the omnivore pellets, is what he eats last. So he kind of saves that for the end. They'll eat it eventually, but they definitely go for the good stuff first, especially when he's on stage and he knows he's doing something good. They could be a little bit more picky and like, oh, I'm not going to do that if you don't give me the good stuff. Oh, good. He's a little over 2.5. He was born in June of 2018. Is that the right math? Yeah, in a new year. Yeah, so he's 2.5 already. He'll probably live to be at least 4, hopefully. He's doing pretty well now. Unless you look underneath their belly, you can't really tell. Well, I should go back a little bit. So the males usually get bigger. So if there's a really huge one that's like, the males can get up to 14 pounds and the females on average are about 8 pounds. That depends also where they live. So I think if they get bigger in warmer climates and they're smaller in colder climates. So if you're down south and you saw a really, really huge one, it's probably a male. But Pete, for example, is only about 9 pounds. So it would be hard to tell if he was a male or female unless you were to like pick him up and look, which I wouldn't advise doing, and looking to see if he has a pouch. Yeah, they're more likely to be out at night, but they're opportunistic. So if they're hungry, then they'll start looking around for food during the day. So in the winter months, there's usually a little less food for them, so they're more likely to be out and about during the daytime. It doesn't mean they're sick or anything. It just means they're hungry. And they'll den in certain areas, so they don't usually live, unless it's a female that has babies, they don't usually stay put for very long. They're kind of like, they're not really migratory, but they keep moving along. So they might stay in a tree stump or something one night, and then the next night stay underneath a porch or in a garage if it's open or something like that. So the males kind of just keep moving, but females will nest up for a little bit when she has babies, but they usually don't stay put for very long. Oh yeah, I saw somebody said they like millipedes, and we do sometimes give him mealworms too. So that's kind of like a fun live. That's really the only thing that we feed him that's alive would be a little mealworm. But yeah, they do like bugs. In the wild, that's what they eat, a lot of insects. It can, so a big one, I've seen people do that, not here or anything with Pete, but people will move them by their tail. If they're not conked out, it's probably I wouldn't ever recommend picking one up, but if you had to, the safest way. But if they're too heavy, just like a turtle, it can actually hurt them a little bit if you hold them up too long by their tail. But they're built kind of for it. But when they're little, there's always like in cartoons, they show them hanging off of a tree. They could maybe do that when they're little, but when they're adults, they're too heavy to hang by like a tree branch. So it'd be best probably not to pick them up by their tail. But you can see it from that video. He can carry a lot of, I was surprised he could take a whole full-size towel up a branch. So their tails are pretty strong. I don't know if they imprint so much as just, if they're kind of raised by people, they just kind of get used to being raised that way. I've worked with other birds, and I think birds are more likely to truly imprint on someone and not know what they are. Yeah, Pete, I'm not gonna say he's not smart, but they have a really small brain. So I don't know if I like to think he likes me more than other people, but maybe I'm just more used to how he works. But yeah, I don't think they imprint. It's kind of like if they're domesticated, they're used to being around people, and he gets used to that. But I don't know that he imprints like a little bird or something would. But since he grew up at a vet or at a zoo around people, he's probably more comfortable being around people, I should say. Oh, imprinting. Imprinting is, they often use it for birds or other animals that are raised by people. So birds in particular, I used to work with birds, so I always talk about birds, but when they're babies, a lot of times they have to learn how to be a bird from their parent. So if they get separated from the parent, then they wouldn't necessarily learn the life skills necessary to survive in the wild. So we often have animals here, like we have our 2 turkey vultures. If you come and see them, they're Olive and Ichabod. They're actually imprinted, and imprinted animals generally don't do very well out in the wild. So that's why we have them here. Hopefully people feel a little more empathy, or a little more attachment to opossums. Again, it's always good to leave them alone, but we love to talk about them so people understand them a little bit more and realize they're just out there trying to eat, and they actually do a lot of things that help us out as well. So eat a lot of eating roadkill, they're like part of the cleanup crew, and eat a lot of ticks and other things we consider pests. So they're really good to have around.
All right, thanks everybody for jumping in with us today. We want to thank you for your continued support of the aquarium during this pandemic, and for staying connected virtually with us, and in fun ways like this.
No, we just appreciate it. Thanks for bearing with us this first time, but we appreciate your support, and hope to see you again next month.